fears had now been confirmed.
But never mind about my fears. I think actually concern for the country, because the implication, if this was repeated in a couple of hundred days' time in a general election, is not Nigel Farage entering Downing Street, or indeed getting any of the things that UKIP voters might want, like tighter control over immigration or a referendum on Europe. In fact, it would be Ed Miliband entering Downing Street as Prime Minister, and disaster for this country, taking us right back to the problems of the Great Recession that Labour were responsible for, and indeed further away from the things that people want, like control over immigration. So I think that's the really stark message from this outcome overnight.
And is that the best you're going to do? Is that going to be the Conservatives' response to UKIP winning the Clacton by-election so resoundingly and threatening you in the next by-election in Rochester and Strood? You're just going to say, if you do that again, voters, you'll get Ed Miliband as Labour Prime Minister. You've got nothing to say and nothing to offer voters to explain why you are failing to win them over.
No, look, absolutely not the case. We have a completely positive message. And
Right.
I'll tell you what it is, since you've asked me. We've created more jobs in this country over the last 4 years than the whole of the rest of Europe put together. We have controlled immigration, particularly from outside of Europe, by reducing, getting rid of 700 bogus colleges, for example, reducing the amount of immigration from outside Europe. What we've not been able to do is control that from within Europe, and the reason is we need to renegotiate with Europe and then have a referendum to deliver that. So we're going to offer people that by the end of 2017. We're going to offer to carry on making sure that this economy, which is now the fastest growing in the developed world, carries on growing fast and delivers the benefits of that growth to people watching your programme.
But on the broader issues when it comes to the economy and whether people are feeling better and confident about the future, clearly, I'm not saying this, clearly the voters are saying it. They don't believe you and you're not cutting through. And people are fed up with the establishment. It's not just you, but it's also the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats. How do you stop UKIP?
Well, the idea that UKIP is somehow not the establishment. Nigel Farage has stood for parliamentary elections more times than I have, and he certainly comes from a much more privileged
But voters don't see him that
background.
way.
But I think it's important that we do uncover, the truth behind UKIP. For example, where do they stand on all the key issues that matter to people? Are they in favour of slashing the NHS,
No.
as they've previously said we should do? Or are they in favour of supporting it, as sometimes they say on ad vans that they send round in these by-elections? Do they believe in 3 high-speed railway lines, HS2, as they said they did before the last election, or none, as they say now? Just at their conference a couple of weeks ago, they called for a so-called WAG tax. This was going to be a tax on consumer goods. 48 hours later, Nigel Farage said, no, that's not our policy, we've already dropped it. The truth is, no one knows what they stand for, but we do know this. You cannot get a referendum on the EU, and therefore ability to control immigration better from within the EU, through a vote for UKIP. What
So
you
why are
will
you chasing?
get is
Why are you
Labour in
chasing?
power.
Why are you chasing their issues then? I mean, if you say you don't know what they stand for, why are you chasing the issues on immigration, for example, in David Cameron's speech on offering extremely generous tax cuts for the middle classes on a promise? Well, hang on a promise that you're going to actually balance the books by 2018, which most people would feel is doubtful, bearing in mind what's going on in Europe. Why are you chasing their agenda? Why aren't you setting your own agenda?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's doubtful. The Office of Budget Responsibility, entirely independently, is the people saying that the book's balanced by 2018. Of course, you're right, anything can change within in Europe, but it's not us saying it, it's independent people saying it. But secondly, we're not chasing anybody's agenda. We went into the last election saying that we would do these things, that we would try to reduce immigration. It is true to say that that has proved more difficult from within Europe. We've been successful outside of the EU. We've slashed immigration. From within Europe, that's been difficult, made more difficult by Europe having this elongated recession, which they're now teetering on potentially again, and Britain's economy being, by comparison, more successful, and therefore people moving here to work. We can't control those things unless we have that in-out referendum. And the question for UKIP is this: how do you get an in-out referendum if voting for UKIP puts Ed Miliband in power? He ain't going to give you one.
Right, well, just quickly, just looking ahead, do you think there should now be a TV debate with Nigel Farage?
Well, these debates, the negotiations over these debates are about to get underway.
But do you think
the
they should?
format for them will be decided. And I'm all up for these debates. By the way, I think we've got fixed-term parliaments. We know when the election is, unlike last time. So there's time to space these out, so they don't necessarily have to overwhelm the election. I'm sure he'll be involved somewhere along the line in those debates. No doubt, the discussions will be ongoing right now about that. But I think it's important that people do get exposed to these arguments simply for the fact that they are all over the place on the key issues. And the things they say they most care about, they can't deliver. They barrack from the sidelines. But actually, in the end, everyone now knows from the results we saw last night, if you go to bed with Nigel Farage, you wake up with Ed Miliband as Prime Minister.
All right, in Rochester and Stroud, you're the chairman of the party. Are you going to win?
Well, look, I very much hope so. One of the things we're going to do, doing right now, is going out for an open primary. That means that every single person who lives in Rochester and Stroud will get the chance to decide who the Conservative candidate should be. You don't have to be a Conservative member. Everybody will get the opportunity to vote. So it's genuine, open democracy, something that I note that UKIP always call for, but when it comes to it, they impose their candidates. And also, there's a different mood in Rochester and Stroud. Just one quick point. People there are fed up with the idea that their MP, who promised them that he wasn't going anywhere, sent voicemails saying the same thing, promised his residents saying the same thing, are now being expected to stump up £250,000 of their taxpayer cash to fund a by-election, which is completely unnecessary. I've met people there who are very angry about this. We're absolutely going to fight a really proper election campaign, give people the proper choice, and I hope people will say, hold on a minute, we don't want Ed Miliband in Downing Street. This is not the way to achieve the things that we want to see on Europe, on immigration, on providing more jobs for people.
Grant Schapps, thank you.
Thanks.
Well, I'm joined now by Paddy OFlynn, UKIP's MEP for the East of England. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Patrick, has a new purple dawn broken in Britain?
Well, there's certainly huge potential for UKIP now, Joe. You know, we have shown that in the east of England, in a safe Tory area, we've absolutely pummeled them, and we've also made good on Nigel Farage's pledge to rip chunks out of disenchanted, taken for granted former Labour core voters. We're offering change. There's only one party with momentum in British politics, and it's big momentum, and it's UKIP. And we were supposed to be well past peak UKIP by now, I believe, weren't we? But we just seem to be going on the up all the time.
Now, you say that UKIP is a party that's made up and represented by people who've done proper jobs in their lives. Well, your newest MP is a privately educated former investment manager who also worked in the Conservative Policy Unit. Doesn't exactly sound like the People's Army, does it?
Well, look, we have a very wide range of people. You can pick on, you know, Douglas Carswell, or you can say
he's your first MP.
Nigel Farage went to private. You can say Nigel Farage went to private school, and he did, and he's never made any secret of that. But incidentally, he's not a former banker. He was a metals trader, and he is someone who's done a proper job and is able to converse and communicate and indeed connect with people from all walks of life. Unlike, I have to say, Grant Schapps, who I have to say appears to simply radiate insincerity. I think this is a guy who would argue that black is white if David Cameron asked him to, and who knows, he yet may.
Right, are you now in agreement with him? And I must apologise for the line, Patrick, we have got you, but it is a little bit crackling. We can still hear you, though. What about the claim by Grant Schapps that you are now part of the establishment that up until now, of course, you have shunned?
What's happened, Joe, is Grant, little pat line of vote UKIP, get Miliband, has blown up in his face, because what we saw particularly in Hayward and Middleton is vote Conservative, get Miliband. And the truth for Grant and his party and his Prime Minister is that outside their home counties' heartlands, and whether they call themselves these days the Notting Hill set or the Chipping Norton set, outside there they are increasingly in large swathes of the country a minor legacy party, the toxic brand. It's UKIP is the party that's pushing Labour in these heartlands, and if they really didn't want to get Miliband, they wouldn't be standing candidates and splitting our vote in huge swathes of the north of England, the Midlands and indeed the east.
Are you going to stand, look for a seat in the general election?
I have been announced effective parliamentary candidate for UKIP for Cambridge, my home city.
Right, OK. Well, that's something I didn't know, but we do know now. Let's have a look at some of your policies, then, that you are obviously going to be talking about that. Will UKIP promise to protect the NHS budget?
Yeah, we'll protect the NHS. We'll spend more on the front line and less on middle management. And we'll also promise not to have these enormous top-down reorganisations that David Cameron promised not to have, and then probably unlikely the biggest one in the NHS's history. So
right. So you're going to match what the Conservatives. You're going to match what the Conservatives have said, have you, about NHS spending?
Well, look, we've still got another autumn statement, another budget to go, haven't we? And George Osborne is known for obsession over his dividing lines and rabbits from hats.
Yeah,
we'll see what numbers he pulls out, and we will tell you in due course our plan to make the NHS a really high priority.
But you can't pledge that you're going to commit to the current spending. But you can't pledge at this moment that you're going to commit.
Well, the current spending is the current spending is a movable feast, isn't it? And clearly the NHS is facing ever more demands, and we would like to spend some time thinking about how to match the undoubtedly increased demand of the world's favourite public service. And I have to say, one way we do think there's more scope to get extra resources is to clamp down no apologies for saying we'll put him back in the NHS, a national health service, not the world's health service.
Would you introduce charging to see your GP as one way?
No, absolutely not. I think Labour Party peers like Lord Winston and Lord Warner are the kind of intellectual Goliaths behind that idea. I think it's a foolish idea. The British public pay into a national insurance pot for the NHS, and they expect it to be there for them in their hour of need, and so it should be.
Right, you want to scrap inheritance tax, abolish the 45p rate and reduce the 40p rate for incomes up to £55,000. How are you going to pay for that?
Well, funnily enough, the 45p rate is a long-term ambition and aspiration. Our urgent priority is to, the most expensive pledge is to lift the personal allowance to the full-time minimum wage. And yes, we have made a big offer for the 40p payers, and I was delighted to see that prompt David Cameron to making a massive U-turn on behalf of George Osborne, who's been lowering the 40p threshold.
Let's just talk about your pledge. How will you pay for that pledge?
Right, we've identified 4 big pots of money. We're going to have a really big reduction in the foreign aid budget. We're going to scrap the HS2 project. So the annual capital cost there is gone. We will obviously keep contributions down to nil. And we will equalise or look to make more equal public spending between England and Scotland, and that means lower public spending per capita than currently exists north of the border.
All right, Patrick, I mean, Nigel has confidently predicted that UKIP could hold the balance of power after the next general election. Who would you rather be in coalition with?
I think we want to hold the feet to the fire of the largest party.
Yes, but who would you rather be in coalition with? Who would you personally rather be in coalition with?
I would rather just win as many seats as we possibly can for UKIP.
I know you're doing well. I know you're doing well, but who would you rather? But who would you rather actually be in coalition with? Realistically, you know, if it came to it and you were holding the balance of power, who would you be in coalition with?
I don't want to be in coalition with either of them, if you're talking about Labour and the Conservatives. I do want to force their hand on issues, as we've been doing quite successfully until about 3 o'clock in the morning without a single MP, and now we have the magnificent Douglas Carswell representing us in the Commons.
All right, thank you very much, and I apologise again for the very poor